Hello, this is Dr. Richard Olivas, and this is a lecture titled 1920s Reactions to Modernity, or to the Modern World. And the thesis, the main idea we are trying to convey is here on your screen. Believing that modernity and 20th century progress threatened older, more secure ways of life, many Americans nostalgically yearned for the good old days and supported various types of fundamentalism. Many Americans said that they wanted to go back to a world that was more normal than the post-World War I world. That war was a terribly disillusioning event to many people. As we have seen, many people called expatriates left the country, moved to France. People like F. Scott Fitzgerald, John Dos Passos, Ernest Hemingway, Claude McKay, many writers and artists, the so-called lost generation. Others who were still here were not sure where to go. Many wanted to go back to a more simple time. Part of the reason for that insecurity was economic in nature. After the World War I ended, many servicemen or soldiers and sailors came home from World War I, and they could not get back their pre-war jobs. The jobs either did not exist or had been given to somebody else. Others could get no job. 1920s prosperity was not shared equally by all. We also note an increase in racism and xenophobia, or fear of foreigners. Racial and ethnic intolerance escalated after World War I as thousands of rural Black Southerners continued to stream into northern cities. And more than 800,000 immigrants arrived in the United States in 1920 and 1921. Many Black Americans felt that their service in the war would lead to better times once the war had ended. The magazine The Crisis dedicated an issue to the Black soldier. And it said this number, or this edition of The Crisis, is dedicated to the nearly 100,000 men of Negro descent who today are called to arms for the United States. Out of this war will rise, too, an American Negro with the right to vote, and the right to work, and the right to live without insult. These things may not and will not come at once, but they are written in the stars, and the first step toward them is victory for the armies of the Allies. This print shows African-American soldiers fighting German soldiers in World War I under the watchful, approving gaze of Abraham Lincoln. And in this tremendous photograph, members of the 369th Colored Infantry, acclaimed by thousands upon their return from France, at a parade in Harlem. Here they're marching up Fifth Avenue, all the way to Harlem. And the record of those men was one of the bravest of any fighting force in that war. But men who were honored abroad and welcomed as heroes in France came back here to scorn and ridicule. And lynching still continued in the United States, even after African Americans who had served the country with valor and distinction came back from the Great War. The Chicago Urban League reported that after each lynching, the number of migrants arriving from the lynch area increased. And many immigrants began to come as large-scale immigration into the United States resumed after the end of World War I. All of this change, all of the feeling that the simple past had gone, caused many Americans to yearn for the good old days, something that we often call nostalgia. President Warren G. Harding succeeded Woodrow Wilson as President of the United States in 1921. This official portrait was made shortly before President Harding died in office. After serving about 2.5 years, he died of a heart attack on a trip to San Francisco. Warren Harding ran for office in 1920 on the campaign slogan, "Return to normalcy," a nostalgic yearning to go back to life as it had been before World War I. What is nostalgia? Now, this is a lengthy explanation. You don't have to memorize it or anything like that, but you should have an idea what nostalgia is and why so many people longed for it. Nostalgia is an English word made up of two Greek words, nostos, meaning to return home, and algia, pain, sometimes called homesickness. According to one dictionary, an archaic, outdated definition said that nostalgia was a severe melancholy caused by protracted absence from home or native place. In modern terms, nostalgia is a wistful or excessively sentimental, sometimes romanticized period or irrecoverable condition or setting in the past. Sort of like, I suppose, people who years later long to go back to high school when they think of how, or some other time in their life when they were so happy. And sometimes it has a strong pull on people. A lot of Americans in the 1920s felt this way. In ancient Greek literature, nostos was a theme which included an epic hero returning home by sea. In ancient Greek society, nostos was deemed a high level of heroism or greatness for those who were able or managed to return. This journey is usually very extensive and includes being shipwrecked in an unknown location and going through certain trials that test the hero. Our modern meaning of acute longing for familiar surroundings or sentimental longing for a period of the past may draw on ancient poetic associations. A nostos is a return to the home, which is symbolically a return to the past. And in a very important sentence that I underlined, ultimately, it is partly a futile or useless wish because neither home nor person remain the same. As one modern lyricist and songwriter said, I could get back to the place, but not the time. Because once the time is gone, it never comes back. If Americans could return to a pre-World War I past, what would it look like? What would that involve? Likely in 1920, most Americans, or many Americans, probably would have agreed that they wanted to go back to a time where there were fewer labor problems, less labor strife, less racial problems, fewer radical ideas. Many longed to return to a simpler small town life, and many wanted to return to a period of religious certainty. There was also a wariness of things foreign and seemingly modern. One of these was communism. Vladimir Lenin, in this picture, in the center at the back of the steps, you can see this cursor over his head. Vladimir Lenin, leader of the Bolsheviks, led a late 1917 violent overthrow of the Provisional Government of Russia, which had been instituted after the resignation of the Romanov Tsar or king. Lenin's plan to overthrow global capitalism unnerved and made very nervous many Americans. One scholar has written, since 1917, communism has claimed at least 65 million lives, according to the painstaking research of demographers. Communism's tools of destruction have included mass deportations, forced labor camps, and police state terror, a model established by Vladimir Lenin and perfected especially by his successor, Joseph Stalin. At the end of World War I, at the Paris peace talks, the question of Bolshevism raised its head, and world leaders gathered at Versailles outside Paris. We're not really sure how to deal with it. US President Woodrow Wilson and other world leaders signed the Treaty of Versailles on June 28, 1919, 5 years to the day after the war began. Many people believed World War I was the war to end all wars. But of course, that did not happen. This map, published about 6 months after the end of World War I, shows at least 12 areas in Europe where fighting continued nearly 6 months after World War I had ended. Many Americans ask themselves, could there be a revolution in the United States? Could the United States government be overthrown by violence? Could it happen here? In this connection, we take a brief look at the Red Scare, the first Red Scare of the 1920s. The term Red Scare refers to the fear that communists, in cooperation with labor unions, violent anarchists, and political radicals, would try to overthrow the government of the United States. The first Red Scare refers to the fear of communist overthrow immediately after World War I. Strikes by labor unions then were seen as a prelude of the coming revolution. Here in Gary, Indiana, in 1919, you see striking steel workers gathered outside a closed steel mill, listening to an impassioned speech by a strike leader. Many Americans thought that this was the work of communists. Here's a worker at a steel casting company, in Columbus, Ohio. Some of these men, of course, had come from southern states in the Great Migration North. After the war, many labor unions went on strike, not to overthrow the government, but as this ballot shows, to get higher wages, shorter hours, and better working conditions from the steel companies. They weren't trying to overthrow the United States. They're trying to make more money, work fewer hours, and have better working conditions. But in 1919, it concerned Americans that there were 3,600 strikes in the United States because workers during World War I had postponed making any demands. But when the war was over, they went on strike and walked off their jobs. But they weren't communists and they weren't radicals. They were ordinary working people. People knew at the time, and we of course have evidence now, that steel mill owners used black workers as strike breakers. When the American Federation of Labor struck US Steel in the fall of 1919, shutting down half the steel mills in the country, management used every dirty trick available to them. It smeared the union leaders in the press by calling them Reds and Bolsheviks. It derided the striking workers because they were immigrants and encouraged local and state militia to intimidate and harass the workers. The original race card players, the steel mill owners, brought in 30,000 to 40,000 African Americans and Mexican Americans as strike breakers, and then taunted the locked out strikers for losing their good white jobs. If strikes across the country made Americans nervous, so too did the bombings in the nation's capital. This is a picture of A. Mitchell Palmer, who was Attorney General of the United States. Mitchell Palmer's home in Washington, D.C. was bombed, as this photograph shows. And it was bombed by a self-admitted anarchist who was linked to another anarchist. And if you look at the caption of the photo at the bottom, you can see the Attorney General shaking hands with members of the fire department. The caption says, "These attacks will only increase the activities of our crime detecting forces," declares Attorney General Palmer, whose Washington home shown above was damaged by a bomb explosion on June the 2nd. Just for fun, I included a picture of that very same house as it appears today, 2132 R Street in Washington, D.C. And you can see that despite the damage done many years ago, it has been restored and it's beautiful. This cartoon shows a European anarchist attacking the Statue of Liberty, or attacking freedom. As the Statue of Liberty welcomes immigrants to these shores, you can see a European anarchist there with a bomb and a knife ready to kill freedom. That's, of course, what it implies. What is anarchism, and what is an anarchist? The term anarchism is derived by negating the Greek term arche, which means rule or ruling power. Anarchy is thus rule by no one or non-rule. It's like, it would be like young people saying, rule not. So it's non-rule. Anarchists can vary widely, and many are non-violent. Uniting this variety is the general critique they have of centralized hierarchical power and authority, the suspicious of hierarchical or concentrated power, and not all are violent. These are some of the individuals arrested in the hours and days after the bomb explosions in Washington, D.C. and other cities. When this photograph first appeared in newspapers, there was a caption below it that read, quote, "Anarchists, Reds, and Radicals who were rounded up in New York City in last night's raids arriving at Ellis Island. These undesirables will remain at Ellis Island until investigation and deportation proceedings have been completed. Many arrested in Newark and other nearby cities arrived at the island during the afternoon." Sacco and Vanzetti and their trial. This trial of two men, Sacco and Vanzetti, shows us the extent to which there was widespread public distrust inside the United States of radicals, especially of foreign radicals. These two men were self-admitted radicals who were arrested for a robbery and a murder in Boston in 1920. Both of these immigrants were from Italy. Sacco and Vanzetti went on trial in July 1921 and eventually were found guilty. But American opinion about them was very divided. Many felt that they were being railroaded into a conviction, not because they were guilty of the charges brought against them, but because they were immigrants or self-proclaimed radicals. That is, that they were being convicted for their political beliefs. Of course, others believed they were guilty. Because there were protests here in the United States and across the world, the appeals process continued for 6 years after the original trial ended in a conviction. Finally, in 1927, an advisory committee appointed by the governor of Massachusetts to review the case said that the original judge had engaged in a grave breach of official decorum, but the committee maintained that Sacco and Vanzetti were guilty as charged. In his final statement, Bartolomeo Vanzetti on the left, in this picture, claimed that the trial had never been about murder, but about his ideas and his ethnic heritage. And he said these words, quote, "I am suffering because I am a radical. Indeed, I am a radical. I have suffered because I was an Italian. Indeed, I am an Italian. I have suffered more for my family and my beloved than for myself. But I am so convinced to be right that if you could execute me 2 times, if I could be reborn 2 other times, I would live again to do what I have done already. I have finished. Thank you." And on August 23rd, 1927, Sacco and Vanzetti were executed. And their name and their guilt lives on, or the question of their guilt, I should say, lives on. Another unfortunate development was the rise of a new Ku Klux Klan, sometimes called the Second Klan or the Klan of the 1920s. The original Klan, as we have seen in a prior lecture, began during the Reconstruction era. The Second Klan was revived by Colonel William Joseph Simmons in 1915. The organization received a charter of corporation from the Georgia legislature, but it remained a very small regional organization until 1920. Then, 2 New York con artists, hoping to capitalize on the membership fees that the Klan charged, started the Southern Publicity Association to promote the Klan's views. Then the House of Representatives started to investigate the Klan, and that gave publicity, and it was no one would have expected it to rise, but it rose because it was always anti-Black and continued that, but now it was also anti-Catholic, and it was also anti-Jewish. This is a book that came out in 1922 called The Rising Tide of Color, The Threat Against White World Supremacy, in which a man named Lothrop Stoddard argued that whites were supreme and every other ethnic group, of course, was inferior. The great W.B. Du Bois, one of the founders of the NAACP, debated Lothrop Stoddard in Chicago, and from what we have read from eyewitness accounts, Du Bois clearly won that debate. This is a poster promoting a movie by D.W. Griffith called The Birth of a Nation, a mighty spectacle, founded on Thomas Dixon's The Klansman. The Klansman argued, and the film based on it argued, The Birth of a Nation said, that Reconstruction in South Carolina was a failure, and that the Republicans and the large number of African Americans who have been elected to office in South Carolina ruined the state. And the only hope for South Carolina was for its government and its women was to be rescued by the honorable so-called Ku Klux Klan. That's the premise of the movie. This movie misrepresented Reconstruction in South Carolina and made heroes or lionized the Ku Klux Klan. This is an advertisement for the film The Birth of a Nation in El Paso, Texas, which of course at that time was a segregated state. And you can see the hoopla and the grandiosity of the descriptions here. But many Americans did not take this silently. In 1915, a large rally was held on the Boston Commons to protest Birth of a Nation. That gentleman in the middle is probably Black activist and journalist William Monroe Trotter speaking to a large crowd. Members of the NAACP picketed that movie everywhere it showed, including a picket outside the Republic Theater in New York City to protest the screening of the movie Birth of a Nation. You can see, if you look at that sign carefully, it says, Birth of a Nation revives KKK, NAACP. This is a newspaper clipping from the Atlanta Constitution titled, Klan is Established with Impressiveness. And then it says in the third paragraph, the new secret organization is founded with a view to taking an active part in the betterment of mankind. According to the statement of its members, who are known as Klansmen, and the motto, misspelled, is Silba Sed Anthar. And that Latin translates as not for oneself, but for others, claiming selflessness as they attacked Blacks, Catholics, and Jewish people. This is an advertisement by the Ku Klux Klan in Wichita, Kansas, November 1926. Hiram Wesley Evans, the second leader of the Ku Klux Klan, was scheduled to speak. You can see circled in red the anticipated number of Klansmen at 50,000, 50,000. Then says Dr. Hiram Wesley Evans at the bottom, Imperial Wizard, one of America's leading statesmen, will give the address of the evening at the forum after the parade. Boys, let's go. Here's a photograph of Hiram Wesley Evans, Imperial Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in 1925. Here are marchers in a Ku Klux Klan parade in Washington, D.C. on September 13th, 1926. The main targets of the second Ku Klux Klan were African Americans, Catholic Americans, and Jewish Americans. In this 1927 cartoon, the Ku Klux Klan chases the Roman Catholic Church, here personified by St. Patrick, chases the Roman Catholic Church from the shores of America, chases the Catholics into the water. Among the snakes being chased out are the various so-called, or the alleged negative attributes of the Catholic Church, including superstition, union of church and state, control of public schools, and intolerance. The Ku Klux Klan of the 1920s was anti-Black, anti-Catholic, and anti-Jewish. In 1924, the Ku Klux Klan branded a Catholic man named Nelson Burroughs, placing a K for KKK in the three places on the body where Catholics make the sign of the cross, like this. Many Americans understood clearly what the Klan was doing. The International Workers of the World, or the Wobblies, a labor union, correctly understood the true objects of KKK hatred in the 1920s. Notice what the flyer says. Protect yourself from this menace. The Ku Klux Klan is anti-Jew, anti-Negro, anti-Catholic, anti-foreigner, and anti-labor. Organize industrially, line up, join the IWW. The Klan rose quickly in membership, but it went down also. It diminished after 1925. For one, leaders had promised far more than they could deliver. Secondly, the Ku Klux Klan never really had a systematic plan of action. And as one scholar has said, its ultimate weakness was that it relies on emotion, not on reason. It plays on people's fears. Here you can see the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, D.C. Stevenson, in the state of Indiana. The Ku Klux Klan portrayed themselves as the guardian of white women, the protector of white womanhood. But Stevenson was convicted of rape and murder of a young white woman in 1925 and sentenced to life imprisonment. So that made a complete lie of their claim that they would protect white women. But the Klan came back again in the 1950s and 60s, the so-called Third Klan of the Civil Rights era. Some Americans looked for certainty in the past, and some seem to look for it in encouraging others to get involved in different reform movements, one of them being to drink less alcohol. So let's take a look at prohibition. Many Americans sought refuge and meaning in this movement. What is prohibition? A prohibition can mean a declaration or injunction forbidding an action in order to restrain or stop. The 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, ratified by the states on January 16, 1919, enacted prohibition with a capital P, which banned or prohibited the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within the United States, as well as all liquor imports and exports. Now, the temperance movement, as it's sometimes called, tried to rely on science. In the early 19th century, well-respected medical doctors like Benjamin Rush, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and a very important individual in the Black community, although he was a white medical doctor, he tried to document the harmful effects of what he called ardent spirits, strong drink or liquor, upon the body and mind. Benjamin Rush wasn't arguing that people should not drink small quantities of wine or something like that, but he was very concerned about ardent spirits or ardent strong liquor. And he made the case in this important book in 1811. In 1833, Indian values and pride intersected with reform and revivalism to revitalize Mashpee as an Indian community. The Mashpee Indians lived in Massachusetts, and they, with the help of this man, William Apess, and his name is misspelled, it should be A-P-E-S-S. William Apess was a Pequot Indian, and he lived in Mashpee, and he began an Indian sobriety society, in essence, and a temperance society to help Indians, because many Indians had been had become addicted to alcohol as a result of trade with Europeans. And it was a problem. So American Indians were trying to form temperance societies as well. One of the goals of the temperance supporters were local option laws. Local option laws. What is a local option law? A local option law gives a county or a municipality or a city the ability to prohibit the sale of alcoholic beverages within its boundaries, creating what was sometimes called a dry county or a dry city. If a state allowed alcohol to be sold, it was called a wet county. 31 states had local option laws before the Civil War began in 1861. So the people who supported temperance or prohibition after the World War I come from a long tradition that had been in American society for quite a bit of time before that. They tried to make their arguments scientific, and they truly believed this was the case. Publications like the Scientific Temperance Journal use science to bring about moral reform. In this case, to encourage people, especially young persons, to drink less alcoholic beverages and to remain temperate. Temperate meant of a sound mind, not under the control or under the influence of alcohol. The virtues of being temperate, or they would say sober, were celebrated in the children's song. And I've just reprinted some of the lyrics here, some of the words, but you can see by the underlined words what the scientific temperance supporters are trying to say. And the children were supposed to sing this song. Teach us to rule ourselves, controlled and cleanly night and day, that we may bring, if need arise, no maimed and useless sacrifice. That we may bring, if need arise, no maimed and useless sacrifice. O motherland, we pledge to thee, head, heart, and hand, through the years to be. So the idea is that people are under the influence of their own minds and not under the influence of alcohol or some other substance that would affect their reasoning. So they can be controlled and their head can be thinking clearly. This is an exhibit by the Scientific Temperance Federation at the International Safety Exposition in 1913, titled Sobriety First, Safety Follows. In the 20th century, some groups used scientific evidence to show how alcohol could affect the human body and the mind, but often they preached total abstinence and did not support or allow their members to use wine in moderate amounts. They insisted on no alcohol at all. It is a fact that those who supported, many people who supported prohibition believed in eugenics. What was eugenics? Well, this is kind of long and dense. You don't have to, you're not responsible, of course, for knowing everything about it, but I would like to make it clear that eugenics was very widely believed, and not just by people who supported prohibition. It was believed by a wide spectrum of people, not only in the United States, but around the world. In the early 20th century, one scholar has written, a leading science, so-called, was eugenics, which claimed to be based on scientific principles that proved that certain harmful or deleterious mental states, most notably feeble-mindedness, were sufficiently directly inheritable that they could be greatly reduced in number by prohibiting the carriers of the defective gene from procreating, meaning that you prevent parents who are feeble-minded from having children. So convincing was this argument, and so attractive its so-called scientific basis, that eugenics quickly won the support of a great many enlightened people, such as Alexander Graham Bell, Winston Churchill, W.E.B. Du Bois, Herbert Hoover, John Maynard Keynes, Linus Pauling, Theodore Roosevelt, Margaret Sanger, and George Bernard Shaw, and I would add many others. Many of the major universities in the United States included a eugenics course in their curriculum. The widespread acceptance of eugenics also prepared the way for the enactment of state laws that permitted the forced sterilization of women thought to be carriers of feeble-mindedness. The U.S. Supreme Court, in the infamous case of Buck v. Bell, held that imbecility or feeble-mindedness was directly heritable. It was entirely lawful to sterilize a woman named Carrie Buck against her will because, as one Supreme Court justice said, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. In the first half of the 20th century, more than 50,000 Americans were sterilized on the basis of eugenics-based laws. But it was not until Adolf Hitler became a prominent advocate of eugenics, praising it in his autobiography, Mein Kampf, and repeatedly invoking it as a justification for his extermination of Jews, gypsies, and gays, that the doubtful science behind eugenics began to be subjected to widespread criticism. In other words, many Americans who believed this only backed away from it when they realized that Hitler believed it. And it was not scientific at all. It was pseudoscience, but it was widely believed to be scientific. So it's true that many people who supported prohibition believed in eugenics, but a lot of people did, including many members of the US Supreme Court. Now, we want to take a very quick review of 2 groups, the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League, because they were important in the growing movement for prohibition. This is Frances Willard, a great American, who was a founder of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the largest women's organization in the United States at that time. Willard initially believed, when she founded her group, that drunkenness caused poverty, but changed her view and came to believe that poverty caused drunkenness. And so she and her supporters dedicated themselves to a do-everything policy, to do everything they could to reduce poverty. The Anti-Saloon League strongly favored prohibition and sometimes used emotional flyers like this to build support for the 18th Amendment. Daddy's in there, and our shoes and stockings and clothes and food are in there too, and they'll never come out. And you can see how hurt the children are that the father is drinking away the family's money. Prohibition, in the end, was accelerated by World War I. U.S. entry into World War I greatly aided the cause of prohibition. Wartime hysteria against all things foreign linked prohibition to patriotism. Prohibitionist propaganda characterized the liquor industry as foreign controlled, pointing out that many breweries were run by German Americans. So you can see the blue arrow there, it says brewery and liquor interests and German propaganda investigated. So they're linking together breweries and Germany, which was at war against the United States. And if you look down the front of this, you can see in the blue bracket, between the blue brackets, it says, this is a summary of the main points of the evidence relating to the brewers' corrupt practices and the system by which they plan to control the United States. The combination between the brewers and the German alliance was proved in the first investigation. Congress, by unanimous vote, repealed the charter of the German alliance. Additional evidence of the disloyal combination is presented in the report. Now, this is not, it's made to look like it's a Senate resolution. In fact, it's a flyer put out by the Anti-Saloon League. But they're trying to link together in the public mind law-abiding Germans who have breweries and the country that we are at war with. During World War I, one prominent historian has written, the federal government took over railroads and factories, passed a conscription act, and curtailed liberty and free speech. As an outgrowth of this, the unprecedented power that concentrated in the government was viewed as the upholder of Americans' moral codes, including their drinking habits. And in a very important sentence, Professor Gary Nash at UCLA wrote this: government created precedents of curtailing individual freedoms for the sake of higher social responsibilities. That is to say, the government came to portray itself, and people came to believe that it was the government who upheld moral codes in the country. How do we summarize prohibition? Well, prohibition, as we know, banned the manufacture, sale, importation, and export and distribution of liquors inside the United States. And Americans strongly supported it. But in 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt issued Presidential Proclamation 2065, proclaiming the repeal of the 18th Amendment and the end of prohibition. And you can see between the blue brackets, now therefore I, Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States, pursuant to the provisions of Section 217A of the said Act of June 16, 1933, do hereby proclaim that the 18th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States was repealed on the 5th day of December, 1933. And then in the bottom paragraph, you can see, observance of this request, which I make personally to every individual and every family in our nation, will result in the consumption of alcoholic beverages which have passed federal inspection, and the breakup and eventual destruction of the notoriously evil illicit liquor traffic, and the payment of reasonable taxes for the support of government, thereby the superseding of other forms of taxation. So the president was concerned about organized crime, which had been making liquor. Americans also wanted to return to religious certainty that they believe had existed before World War I. In this connection, we take a brief look at the Scopes trial. John T. Scopes was a 25-year-old teacher in Dayton, Tennessee. And he made the decision to challenge a law that prohibited the teaching of any theory that conflicted or contradicted the biblical story of creation. There's a picture of John Scopes. Dayton, Tennessee High School is where John Scopes taught the theory of evolution in his classroom. This photograph was taken in June 1925, the month before the Tennessee v. John T. Scopes trial began. The prosecuting attorney, the attorney who prosecuted John Scopes, was William Jennings Bryan, of populist fame, and now a leader of the new fundamentalist movement in Christianity. Darrow, first of all, William Jennings Bryan prosecuted John Scopes, just to be clear, for having violated a law prohibiting the teaching of the theory of evolution in Tennessee public schools. Defense attorney Clarence Darrow, in the red arrow, or near the red arrow, questions prosecuting attorney William Jennings Bryan, near the blue arrow, when the proceedings were moved outside. And in a sense, Darrow's chief witness turned out to be William Jennings Bryan himself. Under oath, Bryan defended the biblical account of creation, arguing that God could and did create the first humans, while Scopes argued for the truthfulness of evolution. The jury found Scopes guilty, and he was fined $100, which was a more considerable sum back then, but of course it was not jail. But the Tennessee Supreme Court overturned the decision on a technicality. Bryan died a few days later after the trial had ended, but significant numbers of Americans still believed in the trustworthiness of the Bible. To summarize, many Americans believed that the post-World War I modern world and that the progress they had seen in the 20th century so far threatened older, more secure ways of life. And many Americans longed somehow to go back to a simpler time that they thought existed, or they remembered had existed before World War I shattered people's sort of naive views about the world. They could go back to the place, but not to the time. And many of them sought refuge and sought security in convincing others to drink less alcohol or drinking less alcohol themselves, and to return to a more religious way of life, or at least religious certainties. I hope that was a helpful lecture to you. We did cover a lot of topics. I wanted to encourage you to go back if necessary, replay some of the parts if you're not sure what was talked about. And if you have any questions, I want to encourage you to email me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And I really appreciate your patience. Thank you very much.